The night my son-in-law stood up at my daughter's doctoral hooding ceremony, tapped his champagne glass in the middle of the restaurant we had reserved for the celebration, and said, in front of her dissertation committee, her colleagues, her closest friends, that he hoped she would not let all this education make her forget her priorities at home. I set my glass down very slowly on the white tablecloth. I did not stand. I did not correct him. I did not look at my daughter because I already knew what I would see on her face, and I was not ready to let him see me see it. His mother, seated to his left, pressed her lips together in something that was not quite a smile and said, "He just means she's been so busy. We're proud of her. We just miss having her home." I smiled at the mother-in-law. I told her the salmon was excellent, and then I excused myself to use the restroom, where I stood over the sink for 2 full minutes, hands braced on the porcelain, looking at my own reflection, counting backward from 60 the way I used to do before difficult hearings. My name is Cecilia Harmon. I am 64 years old. I spent 28 years as a forensic psychologist, the last 11 of them consulting for federal courts on cases involving psychological coercion, intimate partner violence, and what the clinical literature calls coercive control, the slow, systematic dismantling of a person's sense of self by someone who claims to love them. I have written reports that sent men to prison. I have testified in cases where the only visible injury was the look in a woman's eyes. I tell you this not to impress you, but because it is the most painful part of this story. I knew exactly what I was watching happen to my daughter. I knew it the way a cardiologist knows the sound of an irregular heartbeat, and I still could not stop it from progressing, because the one thing my training never prepared me for was watching the patient be someone I had held in my arms since she weighed 6 pounds and 4 ounces and had not yet learned to be afraid of anything. My daughter Noelle was 33 when she defended her dissertation. She had spent 6 years earning her doctorate in public health, focusing her research on maternal mortality rates in rural counties. She was the kind of person who kept a running list of citations in her head, the way other people kept grocery lists. She had her father's stubbornness and my tendency to argue past the point of comfort. She laughed with her whole body, and she cried rarely, and when she did, she was furious about it. She met her husband at a conference in Nashville 2 years before the graduation dinner. He was there representing a private equity firm that funded healthcare startups. His name was Garrett. No, wait. I need to begin from before the beginning, the same way I always told my graduate students. If you want to understand a pattern, you have to go back far enough to see where it started. His name was Owen. Owen Prescott. He was 38, 2 years older than Noelle, the kind of man who remembered which wine you had mentioned, liking 3 conversations ago, and made sure it was already open when you arrived. He was the kind of man who held doors and pulled chairs and called me Dr. Sendenlau, Harmon, with an emphasis that somehow managed to be both respectful and flattering. He had a way of listening that made you feel like the most important person in the room. I noticed the listening. Specifically, I noticed that it was perfect. No one listens that attentively without a purpose. But Noelle was happy in a way I had not seen since before her father's stroke. And grief does something to a daughter's face that a mother cannot watch indefinitely without feeling grateful for anything that lifts it. My late husband, Theodore, had his stroke 3 years before she met Owen. He spent 11 months in rehabilitation before his second stroke took him. Noelle had flown home every other weekend. She had sat with him through the hours when he could not find his words, when the man who had coached her high school debate team sat blinking at a wall because the sentences would not form. She had held it together with a discipline that broke my heart. Owen appeared 8 months after Theodore's funeral. I have thought about the timing every single day since. The first year they dated, I watched and I cataloged. He was attentive in ways that felt calibrated. He texted her during work hours not to ask about her day, but to send her articles about her research, always with a comment that was smart enough to show he had read them, but never so smart that it moved into her territory. He seemed to know instinctively the exact distance to stand from a woman's competence without crowding it. That is a specific skill. I had never seen it deployed so smoothly outside of a clinical context. They married in September, 18 months after they met. Small ceremony, 60 people, a farm outside Charlottesville. Noelle wore her grandmother's pearl earrings. She cried when she saw Theodore's empty chair at the front of the room, where she had placed a photograph of him and a single sunflower. I stood beside her and held her hand and tried not to think about the fact that Owen had suggested the chair and the photograph himself, which at the time I had read as sensitivity and now understand differently. His mother moved from Richmond to Charlottesville 4 months after the wedding. Her name was Heloise. She was 61, twice divorced, a retired event planner who approached other people's lives with the organizational energy of someone who had never stopped being paid for it. She had opinions the way a river has water, constantly, in every direction, with a pressure that felt natural until you realized you were being redirected somewhere you had not chosen to go. She began with the apartment. She thought the kitchen was inefficient. She brought a pegboard for the pots. She reorganized Noelle's pantry one afternoon while Noelle was in a seminar, and when Noelle came home and could not find the measuring cups, Owen said, "Mom was just trying to help. She knows a lot about running a household." Running a household. Noelle had 3 publications and peer-reviewed journals. She had run a research team of 11 people. She had managed a grant budget of $400,000 over 3 years. The measuring cups were in the 3rd drawer. I noticed these things in the way I had learned to notice them professionally. Not each incident in isolation, but the pattern they formed together. The way rivers carve canyons, not through force, but through persistence, over time, in the same direction. Noelle stopped wearing her hair the way she had always worn it, natural and full, the way Theodore used to call her lion's mane. She started straightening it. "Owen thinks it's more professional," she said. "He's probably right. I have to present to the board next month." She stopped calling me on Sunday mornings. We had spoken every Sunday morning since she left for college. "Owen likes us to have brunch together on Sundays," she said, "as a family. He says it's important to build rituals." She stopped taking on the after-hours consulting work she had always done for a nonprofit that trained community health workers in Appalachian counties. "Owen thinks I'm overextended," she said. "He's worried about my health. He says he loves me too much to watch me burn out." Every sentence had a "he thinks" or a "he says" embedded in it, like a load-bearing wall. I drove home from a visit in November. This was 8 months into the marriage, and I sat in my car in my own driveway for 20 minutes. I had a patient once, years ago, a woman who had been slowly convinced by her husband over 4 years that she had a memory problem. She did not have a memory problem. She had a husband who moved her keys, canceled her appointments without telling her, and then expressed gentle concern every time she seemed confused. By the time she found her way to me, she had begun to believe him. Noelle did not have a memory problem, but she was beginning to believe that her judgment did. The graduation dinner was in May. 6 years of work, 2 publications from the dissertation alone, a job offer from a public health institute in Washington. Noelle had defended 3 weeks earlier. I had sat in the back row of the seminar room and watched her field 90 minutes of questions from her committee with a precision that reminded me, so sharply it hurt, of Theodore at his best. Owen had not attended the defense. He had a client meeting. He sent flowers. At the restaurant that evening, 12 people around a long table, candlelight, the kind of place where they fold the napkin into a bird. Owen stood up with his champagne glass and gave his toast. He talked about himself for 2 of the 5 minutes. He talked about how supportive he had been during the hard years, the late nights, the stress. He talked about looking forward to Noelle having more time now that the school part was finished. Benny said the thing about priorities at home, and Heloise said the thing about missing her, and Noelle sat with her hands folded in her lap and smiled at the tablecloth. I looked at my daughter's smile. I had catalogued hundreds of smiles in my career. That one was the smile of a woman who has learned that smiling is safer than reacting. In the restroom, I called my colleague, Dr. Anita Bowers, who runs a coercive control intervention program at Georgetown. I told her what I had been watching for 11 months. I did not editorialize. I gave her the sequence, the timeline, the behaviors. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You already know what this is, Cecilia. You're calling me because you need someone to say it back to you." She was right. "Start building the infrastructure," she said, "not for you, for when she's ready." I returned to the table and finished the dinner. I toasted my daughter's achievement with sincerity and watched Owen watch me, the way a man watches someone he has decided is not a threat. I smiled at Heloise. I asked her about her garden. I hugged Noelle goodbye in the parking lot and held her long enough to feel her exhale the way she used to when she was small and something had frightened her and she had finally found me. "I am so proud of you," I said. "That research is going to matter to people who have never heard your name. Do not let anyone shrink that." She pulled back and looked at me. Something passed across her face. Then Owen called her name from the car. For the next 5 months, I built what Anita called the infrastructure. I kept notes in a journal I stored in my office, not my home. Dates, direct quotes, observations. I visited when I was invited, and I never pushed. I sent Noelle articles about her field. I called on Tuesday evenings, which was the one night Owen had a standing poker game, and Noelle's voice on those calls was different, not dramatically, but in the way that a room sounds different when a window is open versus sealed. I reconnected with her college roommate, a woman named Petra, who had told me at the wedding that Noelle had been a little distant lately and had looked embarrassed about saying it. I called Petra 8 months after the graduation dinner. She had noticed more than she had been willing to say at the wedding. She said that when she suggested coming to visit for a weekend, Noelle had said she would have to check with Owen. When Petra pointed out that it was Noelle's apartment too, Noelle had changed the subject. 3 weeks later, Noelle had called back and said the timing wasn't great. "It's been like that for a while," Petra said. "I keep telling myself I'm reading too much into it." "You're not," I said. "The financial detail I discovered by accident, the way you often discover the thing you were already looking for but hoping you were wrong about. Noelle and I had lunch in October, just the two of us, a cafe near her institute. When the bill came, she opened her wallet and then closed it and said quietly that she had left her card at home. I paid. The following month, same thing. The third time, she said it without the excuse. She just said, 'Could you get this one?' and looked at the window. My daughter earned a salary from a public health institute. She had a doctorate. She was asking her mother to cover a $14 lunch. I asked her, very gently, about their finances. She said Owen managed everything. He was better with money. He had the investment background. She had a card for household expenses, but she tried not to use it for personal things because Owen liked to keep the categories clean. Categories. She tried not to spend money on her own lunch because her husband liked to keep the categories clean. I did not react. I asked about a paper she was working on and let her talk for 20 minutes about maternal health disparities. And she talked with her hands the way she always had, and I watched her become herself for a little while, and I held on to that. That evening, I called Anita again, and I said I needed to accelerate the timeline. The piece that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday in January. My phone rang from a number I did not recognize. The voice was careful, measured, the voice of someone who has rehearsed what they are about to say many times and is still not sure they can get through it. "Dr. Harmon, my name is Josephine. I was married to Owen Prescott for 3 years. I got your name from Noel's Research Institute directory. I have been trying to decide whether to call for 4 months. I sat down. Josephine spoke for 51 minutes. She told me she had met Owen when she was 30, that Heloise had relocated within 6 months of their wedding, that the control had begun with suggestions about her wardrobe and ended with Josephine sitting in a parking lot with $40 in cash and a bag she had packed while Owen and Heloise were at Sunday brunch. She told me that Heloise had called her family, her own parents, her sister, and told them that Josephine was struggling with her mental health, that Owen was concerned, that they were trying to get her help. She told me that when she finally left, Heloise had written her a letter that said, "You were warned that you were not equipped for this family. We tried to help you become what he needed." She had kept the letter. She had kept everything. 3 years of bank statements showing her salary transferred into a joint account she had no card for. Photographs of a bruise on her upper arm shaped like fingers, taken in the mirror of a gas station bathroom 2 miles from the house. Screenshots of text messages from Heloise correcting her grammar, her cooking, her tone with Owen's friends. A voicemail from Heloise coaching Owen on what to say to Josephine's sister to make the sister doubt her. She had kept it all in a fireproof box under her bathroom sink, in the apartment she now shared with 2 other women in Arlington, working as a paralegal at a firm that specialized in domestic violence cases. She had spent 2 years understanding the legal anatomy of what had happened to her. "I don't know if Noelle is ready to hear this," Josephine said, "but I know that if someone had called her mother 3 years ago, I might have gotten out sooner." I told her that what she had done tonight was one of the bravest things I had heard in a long career of listening to people tell me difficult things. I meant it completely. I did not tell Noelle about Josephine immediately. I sat with it for 2 weeks. I spoke with Anita every other day. I spoke with an attorney who would handle financial coercion cases in Virginia. I spoke with a private investigator who had worked domestic cases for 19 years and did not use the word domestic the way people use it to mean small. And then I sat with Noelle in my living room on a Saturday afternoon in February, the windows full of winter light, and I told her about Josephine. I did not come in with the evidence. I did not bring the photographs or the letter or the bank statements. I made tea and I held her hands across the coffee table that Theodore had built in the garage the summer Noelle was 12. And I told her that a woman named Josephine had called me, that she had been married to Owen before her, and that some of what Josephine had described sounded familiar to me from things I had watched happen to my own daughter over the past 2 years. Noelle was very still. I said, "You do not have to say anything right now. You do not have to agree with me. I just need you to know that I see you. Not the version of you that exists in that house. You, the person who designed her own dissertation methodology at 27, the person who argued with her IRB committee and won. That person is still there. I have been watching for her." She did not cry right away. She looked at the coffee table. She ran her thumb along the edge of it, the way she had done as a child when she was thinking. Then she said, "He moved money out of my personal account 2 months ago. I didn't ask him about it because I was afraid of what he would say." She said, "Heloise told me last month that women with careers like mine usually end up alone." And then she said she didn't mean it like that. She said, "The bruise on my shoulder from November. I told you I walked into the door of the car." I did not say anything. I moved to the sofa next to her, and I put my arm around my daughter, and she leaned into me and she cried, not the polite, managed crying she had been doing for 2 years. She cried the way she had cried when her father had his second stroke, the full-body grief of someone releasing something they have been holding upright through will alone. When she was quiet, she looked at me and said, "How do I do this without them destroying everything I've built?" "That is exactly the right question," I said, and we are going to answer it together. The next 8 weeks were the most deliberate of my life. Anita connected us with an advocate named Rosalind, who had helped women leave controlled situations for 17 years. Rosalind said the same thing Anita had said. Leaving is the inflection point, the most dangerous moment, the one that requires the most preparation. We prepared. Josephine's evidence went to the attorney. The forensic accountant found that Owen had been redirecting a portion of Noel's salary into an LLC registered in Heloise's name for 14 months. My 5 months of documentation went into the file. Petra provided a written account of the phone calls where Noel had needed Owen's permission to schedule a visit with her own friend. Noel moved out on a Wednesday afternoon while Owen was at a conference in Chicago and Heloise was at a luncheon. Rosalind had coordinated everything. By the time Owen's flight landed, Noel's essential documents, her research files, her grandmother's pearls, the photograph of Theodore that had sat on her nightstand, all of it was in my townhouse. Owen's response followed the sequence exactly as Rosalind had predicted. First, the messages, 216 texts over 4 days, ranging from anguish to accusation. Then, silence for a week, which meant the attorneys were being retained. Then, the campaign. Anonymous professional complaints were filed with Noel's Institute suggesting research ethics violations. A social media account appeared posting fabricated screenshots of messages supposedly from Noel, designed to make her look erratic. Heloise called Noel's colleagues, weeping, saying she was worried about Noel's mental state, that I had manipulated my daughter, that Owen was devastated and confused. We had anticipated all of it. The IP address behind the fake account was traced. The ethics complaints were filed on the same day from the same device, which the investigator documented. Every call from Heloise was logged. The fabricated screenshots were analyzed and found inconsistent with Noel's actual message metadata. And Josephine, who had spent 2 years preparing, walked into the courthouse in Arlington on a Tuesday morning in April and testified for 4 hours. She was precise. She was calm. She did not perform grief or anger. She laid out the system the way a structural engineer describes a building, load by load, joint by joint, and she showed how the same design, the same sequence, the same language had been applied to 2 different women in 2 different cities across 6 years. The financial architecture, the social isolation, Heloise's role not as a passive presence, but as an active co-designer, the person who managed the perimeter, who decided which relationships were permitted, who delivered the corrections that Owen was never seen to make himself. Noel testified the following morning. She brought her own notes, typed and indexed. She described the graduation dinner. She described the Sunday brunches she had not been permitted to skip, the salary she had not been permitted to access, the friend she had needed permission to visit. She described the bruise on her shoulder and the explanation she had given herself each of the 9 times she gave Owen an explanation instead of the truth. She described Heloise sitting across from her at the kitchen table, voice low and warm, saying, "Men like Owen need to feel like the strongest person in the room. That's not weakness, sweetheart. That's just how you protect what you have." 2 of the jurors looked at each other. One wrote something down immediately. Owen's attorney argued that Noel was a highly educated woman who had made her own choices, that no one had forced her into any financial arrangement, that a happy marriage had been destroyed by a mother-in-law's interference. And here he looked at me in a way I had seen before, the look that expects a woman to flinch. I did not flinch. I had spent 28 years reading people from the other side of a courtroom table. I knew exactly what he was doing, and I knew the judge did too. The pattern was not a he said, she said. It was documented. It was corroborated. It was replicated across 2 marriages, 2 women, 2 states, with the same fingerprints on every door. Owen was convicted on charges of financial fraud and coercive control under Virginia's updated statute. Heloise was named as a co-conspirator in the financial case. Owen received 3 years. Heloise received 18 months and a permanent restraining order. When the verdict was read, Heloise turned from the defense table and looked at me across the room. She looked genuinely surprised, the specific surprise of someone who had always been able to convince people of what she needed them to believe, confronting a moment where the convincing had stopped working. I held her gaze and I did not look away until she did. That was 18 months ago. Noelle lives in Washington now, 2 blocks from the institute where she works. Her research on maternal mortality in rural counties was cited this past year in a federal policy brief. She runs on Sunday mornings along the mall and calls me afterward, and our Sunday calls are back, and sometimes she talks for 45 minutes about her work, and sometimes she says almost nothing, and we just stay on the line together with our coffee, and that is enough. She is seeing someone, a research librarian named August, who is quiet in the way that reflects rather than absorbs. The kind of person who makes space for what you're saying rather than waiting to respond. The first time they disagreed about something, she told me, he said, "I think I might be wrong about this. Can we look at it again?" She called me that evening, and her voice had a quality I had not heard in years. She said, "I forgot that was possible, someone just saying they might be wrong." She wears her hair the way she wants to now. She orders whatever she likes at restaurants. Last month, she took on a consulting project with the Appalachian nonprofit she had dropped 4 years ago. And she called me the night she signed the agreement and said, "I feel like I found something I thought I'd lost for good." You don't know what ordinary costs until someone takes it. You don't know what it's worth until you get it back. Josephine and Noelle meet for lunch on the first Friday of every month. They found each other on the far side of the same wreckage, and they are rebuilding in their own directions, and they check in the way people do when they share a geography that no one else entirely understands. They talk about their work. They talk about small things. They do not talk about Owen very much, because Owen is not the most interesting thing that ever happened to either of them, and they have both decided to live accordingly. I wrote this down because I am 64 years old and I have spent my career understanding exactly how this works, and it still happened inside my own family, which means it can happen inside anyone's. I wrote it down because there is a woman listening to this right now who has told herself she is overreacting. There is a mother listening who has told herself it is not her place. It is your place. It has always been your place. Love does not require an audit of your behavior. Safety does not require your silence. And the person who tells you that managing yourself is the price of keeping the peace, that person is not keeping the peace. They are keeping you managed. Before I go, 5 things this taught me that I want you to carry. The first, coercive control rarely announces itself. It arrives as devotion. It looks like someone who pays attention, who remembers, who shows up. The difference between care and control is whether it costs you something to refuse it. Pay attention to what happens when you say no. The second, the person who enables the abuse is not a bystander. Heloise never raised her hand. She built the architecture. She managed the entrances and exits. She made the corrections sound like kindness. The enabler who smiles while the door closes is not less responsible than the person who locks it. The third, financial independence is not a luxury. It is a lifeline. The moment someone else controls your access to money, they control your access to options. Guard that independence the way you would guard your own name. The fourth, write it down. Keep it somewhere only you can reach. The day will come when your word alone is not enough, and the evidence will say what you could not to people who could not have believed you without it. The fifth, build your team before you need it. Do not wait until you are ready to leave to find the people who will help you leave safely. The infrastructure has to exist before the moment arrives. You cannot construct a fire escape while the building is burning. If this story found you today, do something with it. Not something large, something specific. Think about the woman in your life who has gotten quieter this year. The one who changed something about herself that she used to love. The one who checks her phone differently now, with a particular kind of stillness. Ask her how she is, and when she says fine, ask her again. The second question is sometimes the one that opens the door. What stayed with you from the story? And where are you listening from? Leave it in the comments. Your voice in that space might be the thing that helps someone else find theirs. I keep coming back to something I said to a graduate student once, years ago, when she asked me how people get away with systematic cruelty for so long. I told her that cruelty with good manners is almost invisible, that it moves quietly, through suggestion and smile and perfectly timed concern, and that the people inside it often can't name what's happening to them because nothing dramatic enough has occurred to justify the word. Owen and Heloise never had a dramatic moment. That was the design. What they had was patience and a shared understanding of how to make control feel like care. Every restriction came wrapped in love. Every correction arrived as concern. The architecture was elegant, and it held because Noelle is a good person, someone who looks for the charitable interpretation, who assumes good faith, who works to meet people where they say they are. That is not a weakness, but it is something certain people learn to use. What broke the architecture was not a single act of courage. It was the accumulation of small, deliberate choices made by people who refused to stop paying attention. Josephine, who had spent 3 years rebuilding herself and chose to use that strength for someone she had never met. Petra, who felt something was wrong and said so when I called even though it was uncomfortable. Anita, who listened to my account and gave me back the clinical language I needed to trust what I was seeing in my own daughter's face. None of these moments were grand. All of them were essential. And Noelle herself. The thing I want people to understand about my daughter is that she was never passive. She was careful. There is a difference. She was a woman operating inside a system that had been engineered to make every exit look dangerous, and she was gathering information, testing the walls, waiting for the moment when she had enough ground under her feet to move. When I sat across from her at Theodore's table and said Josephine's name, she did not crumble. She organized. Within minutes, she was asking the right questions. Not, how do I survive this? But how do I do this without losing what I've built? That is not the question of someone who has been broken. That is the question of someone who has been temporarily contained. I think about what it costs a person to spend years performing a smaller version of themselves. The energy that goes into monitoring your own expressions, your own opinions, your own instincts. Noelle spent that energy for 2 years, and she still published research that is now in a federal policy brief. I do not know what she would have done with those years if she had spent them freely. I know it would have been more. The outcomes in a case like this are not accidental. Owen and Heloise did specific things over a sustained period and produced specific consequences. For Noelle, for Josephine, and ultimately for themselves. The same is true in reverse. The people who helped Noelle leave did specific things and produced specific consequences. What any of us do with the knowledge we carry, the integrity we maintain when it's inconvenient, and the willingness to keep moving when the path is difficult. Those things have weight. They accumulate. They determine what becomes possible. Noelle wears her hair the way she wants now. She orders her own food. She calls me on Sunday mornings. These are small things and they are everything, and I will not pretend to be casual about getting them back.